because we
Greetings, fellow
only have
scientists.
an hour.
I'd like to
Or we
welcome
only
you
have-
all to the Wisconsin Science Festival online field trip, Nature Explorers. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're ready to get started. My name is Dan from the Wisconsin Science Festival team, and we're here with two special guests, Lyric Bartholomew from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Nikki from the Aldo Leopold Nature Center for this field trip experience. We're going to see the connections between the land and the lab today. So how can you participate? Well, you'll notice that your picture and audio are muted, but if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. As soon as you have a question, go ahead and type that in right away, and we'll ask your question out loud during the field trip. You can also use the chat to respond to some questions we may ask you. Everyone can also participate in our Bioblitz. You can download an app on your phone called iNaturalist and find a project called the Wisconsin Science Festival Bioblitz 2020. After the field trip today, you can use the app to take pictures of all the life you see around you and participate with people across the state that are adding to this collection. We'll get our observation skills ready for the Bioblitz during this field trip. And afterwards, you can try and find at least 10 living things around you to add to the Bioblitz. When we each do a little bit, we can do big things together. This field trip will be recorded, and as always, we ask that you do this in all activities at the Wisconsin Science Festival with a responsible adult. We'd also like to thank all of our sponsors and partners that help make the Wisconsin Science Festival possible. You can find out more activities and events during the festival today, this weekend, and beyond at the wisconsinsciencefest.org. With that, we're excited to get started today, so take it away, Nikki.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aldo Leopold Nature Center. My name is Nikki, and I'm one of the educators here. I've been a teacher for about 12 years here at the Nature Center, and prior to that, I had a lot of different jobs in environmental education. When I was a kid, I didn't know this kind of job existed. I thought that you had to work in a lab or you had to be out in the wild with the animals. And in college, I found out that there were environmental educators, and that meant that you could work with people and you could work outside, and you could be teaching people all about the connections that we find outside. Now, this place is called the Aldo Leopold Nature Center. It's named after a famous scientist named Aldo Leopold. If I didn't mention it before, I'm in Monona, Wisconsin, which is right next to Madison. And Aldo Leopold was one of the professors at the university here in Madison. And he introduced students to this idea that we're all connected to nature. Instead of there being animals and mushrooms and plants and then people over here, it was that we're all connected to one another. We all have an impact on one another. And so he was a scientist, he was a teacher, he was a father, and he was an amazing man. So we named our nature center in honor of him. Today, Kara is going to be filming me, and so you might hear her talking to me once in a while. And at our nature center, we have 90 acres of land. An acre is about the size of a football field. So think about 90 football fields. We have three main habitats. One behind me is the prairie. We also have the woods or the forest habitat. And next, the third habitat, and the one that I like to work in the most, is our pond habitat. And students come here from all over Wisconsin, as young as 2 years old, as old as high schoolers. And we do all sorts of activities with them. But usually the favorite thing that they like to do is go dipping in the pond and see what we can find in our pond habitat. And yesterday I took my net, a net just like this, and I brought my pans out and I went dipping into the pond to see what I could find, and we were so lucky. So I'm really excited to share some of these animals and insects that I found. So if you come up a little closer, thank you, Kara, you can see I have some of them in different dishes. And the one that Kara's going in really close on, I was so excited to find. This is called a water scorpion. Now, It's not related to a scorpion like you're thinking of with the big stinger on the tail. This is about 2 to 3 inches long right now, and it's an insect. So you probably know, or you've heard, that insects have 6 legs and 3 body parts. But you can see here that on him, his 2 front legs look like they're long antennas, or that they're hands. Well, he kind of uses those 2 front legs for hands to catch his prey in the water. And then when he catches his prey, get this, he's gonna inject them with a poison that's gonna liquefy its insides. Isn't that awesome? And so he actually does bite. So I'm not going to pick him up or hold him or anything like that. But you can see his eyes. And then something else that I found super cool about them is that on his tail, right here at the tip of the tail, I'm not sure if you can tell that it's actually out of the water. And so can anyone guess why his tail would be out of the water? Does anyone have an idea about what's going on there?
And if you have an idea, you can use the chat to respond. We did get a comment from Connor who agrees that it is awesome. Connor's also taking a guess that maybe it's so that it can breathe. Emma also agrees, maybe it's breathing.
Absolutely. So it has a caudal tube, and caudal refers to tail, the word tail, and that it actually has 2 tubes in its tail, and he's using his tail like a snorkel. So he's not going to breathe out of a mouth or a nose. Oh no, he's going to breathe out of his tail. And so that way his body will sometimes dip down, kind of like a letter J. But he is breathing. And even their eggs, when they lay their eggs have little snorkels on them too to help them breathe, which I thought sounded really funny to have eggs with little snorkels on them. But so he is our fierce predator. And then let's see here. Oh, so next to him, we have these tiny little back swimmers, and they look really little and kind of basic compared to the water scorpions, because the water scorpion is kind of majestic and big. But what I think is pretty cool about the back swimmers is that they are camouflaged on both sides of their body. So if you can see what colors are on them, one side of their body is very light, and one side is really dark. So does anyone know why one side of their body would be light and one side of their body would be dark? If they weren't in these trays, they would be in our pond, which from above our pond, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's a pretty dark pond. It's not like a Caribbean blue or anything. It's kind of brown. So why would they have 2 different colors on their bodies?
So far, no guesses in the chat yet.
Okay.
Maybe Lyric. Do you have a guess?
Well, what I think is really cool
So
is that
Connor has a comment here that the water may be darker and the sky is brighter.
woohoo! Absolutely. So if there's a predator from below and looking up at the sky, our sky is typically white or blue. And if there's a predator from above looking down again at that insect, his back is dark. So he's got a really cool way of camouflaging himself. And the back swimmer, just like that huge water scorpion, is a predator. And the back swimmer also injects poison into their prey. And be careful, because he bites as well. So once again, not going to pick that guy up. But I want to scoot over next to also one of my favorite things that I find in the pond. I'm not sure if you can see this right here. So a lot of people think about insects as being something that just is out when it's warm, you know, in the springtime, in the summer. These insects live in the pond for 2 to 5 years before they become adults. Does anyone know who this is that we're looking at? Or did you catch the name? These are actually first years. They haven't been here very long at all. They probably hatched this summer.
A couple guesses. Connor guessed dragonfly.
Emma, Emma and Zina have idea about it being a baby dragonfly or a dragonfly nymph.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And so these guys, one of them I am actually going to pick up because they do not bite. And I'm just going to show you. So now, like I said, they're in here for 2 to 5 years. And while they're in the water, they're going to shed their skin perhaps, 10 times. And as they shed their skin, they get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And then finally, though, their last shed, they're going to come out as an adult and have wings.
Lyric and I are in agreement that they are so cute.
Yeah, I think they're pretty adorable too.
Yes.
Now, as an adult, something that I think is kind of strange, though, is that they only live about 2 to 3 weeks as an adult. So they're spending their whole time growing and growing, and all that change is going into that journey of getting bigger, which is kind of opposite than humans. You know, we spend this time being a child, and then when we're we're an adult for a really long time. But all their energy goes in to being a kid. So they are one of my favorite insects. But does anybody know what an adult dragonfly likes to eat the most? Not when it's a nymph. Oh, and when they're a baby or immature, they're called a nymph. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. So I don't have a lot of patience in the summertime for things that bite me, like mosquitoes. I understand that mosquitoes are really important to nature and that they serve as food for a lot of animals, right? But I love dragonflies because that is their favorite food as an adult. A dragonfly can eat 50 to 100 insects in a day. So
And
whenever
what kind of insects did the dragonflies like to feed on?
mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes.
So
And I
when-
think
go
Lyric
ahead.
has some experience, I think, with mosquitoes.
Yeah, you know, we're talking about whether the adult mosquitoes would feed on the adult mosquitoes would be fed on by adult dragonflies, but where are baby mosquitoes?
Well, baby mosquitoes as well are going to be found in our pond. All the larvae are going to live their life there until they hatch. And even after they're hatched, they're going to stay usually near a water source. Does anybody have any questions so far about anything that we've looked at or talked about?
There's a question in the Q&A about if the dragonfly nymphs and maybe the mosquito larvae as well can breathe in and out of the water, and like how do they breathe when they might live in water?
The dragonfly nymphs?
Yeah.
Well, I believe that the dragonfly nymphs, I think they breathe it's kind of like in their abdomen, their breathing apparatus. But it is really cool that water insects have different ways of breathing. Some are going to breathe out of their tail. Some are going to have a different way that they, you know, like the damselfly nymph here, she's breathing out of her tail as well. But they definitely have different ways of breathing. But he can be out of the water for a short period of time. And I know that that's safe for him.
Fascinating. And if anyone else has any questions at all for Nikki or Lyric, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We're also seeing some great things in the chat. Nikki, is there maybe one more thing that we can see that is living in the pond on the land?
Yes. So if you come on over this way, you said living in the pond and the land?
Yeah, so like at your site there. Yeah.
Sure. So when we were doing the dip yesterday, these guys are always, I find them to be kind of funny. Can you see what they are? There's quite a few of them. 1, 2, 3. Some of them are moving really slowly. Can anyone tell me what these guys are?
We've got some guesses in the chat that they might be snails.
Yes. So snails are so important. Even though they seem kind of like, you know, like the ho-hum animal, they're not an insect. They're in a group called gastropods. And they're like our cleanup crew. Slugs are also related to snails, right? And they both are the animals that are going to eat dead leaf matter. And oh, it looks like somebody's hiding under this leaf. So I get easily distracted because I'm a naturalist / educator, but let's see who's, hello. We had a bunch of friends underneath the leaf. That's where all those back swimmers went to. So I was just saying about the snails that if it wasn't for the snails, our pond would fill up with leaves every year. But they're eating that dead, decaying matter, and they have a really, really important role. And so although they just kind of like crawl around and they get little bits of plants growing on top of them, they're super important to have here. You can see how they have their little leg there, and they've got their antenna, and they're scurrying around.
That's amazing. So with that, I think we can transition from the land over into the lab. So Lyric, can you maybe give an introduction of yourself and your work and how we use the lab to find out more about how all of these things in the ecosystem live together?
Absolutely. So I'm delighted that all of you joined us today. My name is Lyric, and I'm a professor in the vet school, actually, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I study mosquitoes. And I spend a lot of time working with kids and families learning about mosquitoes too. So my question for you guys is, why would anybody want to study mosquitoes? Any ideas why somebody would be a mosquito scientist?
So far it's crickets in the chat, but we've got, actually Connor agrees that they're neat. So they're kind of just interesting to study.
Right, I agree. And I want to show you some mosquitoes in my lab. So show you how we work with them. Does anybody else know anything about mosquitoes that makes them think, oh yeah, it's a good thing Lyric's over there at the University of Wisconsin studying mosquitoes for us?
I think maybe some of the insects that Nikki was showing us are interested in studying mosquitoes for their maybe some selfish reasons for
For
themselves.
selfish reasons, right? So let's look at some mosquitoes. So I'm in my mosquito lab here on campus. If you've ever been to Madison and been to the campus and gone to Babcock Hall for ice cream, I'm right across the street from Babcock Hall. So you can think about where I am on campus. And I work in a lab, so I run a lab. And in my lab, we collect mosquitoes at places like Aldo Leopold Nature Center, and we raise mosquitoes in the lab so that we can do mosquito science. Mosquitoes can sting. So yeah, so let's look at some mosquitoes, and you can think about how, I'll show you some mosquitoes under the scope. You can think about all these things that we talked about with Nikki. So can you guys see my microscope here? Yeah, and it may not be really big, but I can zoom in. And what do you think I'm showing you right now? Does this look like a mosquito? Just like that dragonfly baby. Did it look like a dragonfly? Does this look like a mosquito? So this is a baby mosquito.
Yeah, Emma says not really.
Not really, right? Because when you think of a mosquito, Emma, you probably think of a mosquito that has wings and that has a mouth that bites you, right? But this is the baby version of a mosquito. And it's underwater in a drop of water on my microscope in my lab. And now check this out. Look at what this mosquito has. It's got a head. You know the parts of an insect, like Nikki said, they have three body parts. This mosquito has a head, and behind the head it has a thorax, and behind that it has an abdomen. And then it's got this weird little pokey thing, right? Do you see this pokey thing that's pointing up at you? That's the mosquito's tail. And what do you think that mosquito uses its tail for?
Is it similar to the water scorpion's tail?
That's exactly right. So
yeah,
you nailed it, right? Its tail is essential for this mosquito to be able to get oxygen out of the air. So the mosquitoes, when you see mosquitoes, like if you're in your backyard and in the summertime and you look around and you have like a wagon or a bucket that's been sitting out and there's a lot of water in it, if you look and you see things swimming around in that water, it's probably a baby mosquito. And it's probably got its little tail end up facing you so that it can grab oxygen from the air. So this is a really cool look at that mosquito because it's got a lot of the things Nikki was telling you about. It actually has some gills and it has a little tube for collecting oxygen from the air. So if this little thing is swimming around in Aldo Leopold Nature Center's pond, do you think that maybe a dragonfly nymph or a back swimmer or a water scorpion might find that delectable? They do, like mosquito larvae feed all kinds of other insects and other things in the pond. So we saw predator insects in all of those pans that Nikki showed us. What are other things that are in the water that might eat a mosquito baby? What do you think? What else is swimming around in a pond? Yeah, totally. Fish and frogs, tadpoles, ducks, all kinds of things eat these little mosquito babies. I wanted to show you another thing too. So if we're going looking for mosquitoes, if my lab is going looking for mosquitoes, which we do, there are all kinds of different life stages that we might look for. And so this is also a baby mosquito. Can you guess what this might be?
We had a question in the Q&A about what those white specks were.
Yeah, what do we think these might be? Those are mosquito eggs. And this is really cool because I got these from my lab. And these are eggs that a mosquito just laid, so they're white. And here are some eggs that were laid a couple of hours ago, and they're turning a different color. So they change colors over time so that they can resist all of the things in the environment that might be dangerous to them. So if it gets really cold, they have like a little coat on. But as soon as they're freshly laid and just out, they're this very white color, and they're really vulnerable. So those are some mosquito babies that would be interacting with all of the baby insects that you learned about from Aldo Leopold Nature Center. And in my lab, we actually do go out and try and find mosquito babies in the environment. So now you see what they look like.
That's fascinating. And there's a question in Q&A, and it can be for both Nikki and Lyric. Do you get bit by mosquitoes during your work?
Oh, thank you for asking. So you heard Nikki allude to the fact that she definitely gets bitten. I also get bitten. Sometimes I have to reach in and out of cages in my lab, and the mosquitoes will bite me. But you know, I've been bitten by so many mosquitoes so many times that I don't get the same kind of mosquito bites that maybe you guys get. If you get bitten by a mosquito and you have a little red lump on your skin and it's insanely itchy, it doesn't really happen to me anymore because I've been bitten so many times. So we can ask Nikki too.
Nikki, have you gotten a lot of mosquito bites this year?
I also get bit by other things other than mosquitoes, sometimes black flies.
Yes.
I've been bit by a garter snake before, only after I picked it up. And let me think, anything else? No, I think that's about it.
And so why do things bite? So the mosquito what is the mosquito doing when it's biting us? And how can that be a problem for us?
It's a great question. Do you guys know? Do any of our student scientists know the answer? Why a mosquito bites us? Oh, maybe it's protecting itself. So some insects for sure defend themselves, right, by stinging you or biting you. If you've ever played with an ant nest, maybe you've gotten bitten by an ant. So one possibility is it's protecting itself. Another possibility is for food, or so it can reproduce. Yeah, and so mosquitoes take blood so that they can grow the next generation of babies. So they're feeding their babies by taking your blood. So if I tell you that they're taking blood to feed their babies, does that tell you what kind of mosquito is taking blood? Do you think that would be the males or the females that would need nutrition for their babies? Females. That's right. So it's only female mosquitoes that take your blood, and they only do it because they're trying to grow up their eggs. So they're not taking your blood to be mean to you or to try and make you run away. In fact, they would like for you to stay right there, sitting still and not moving so they can take blood. So they're really just taking blood to feed their babies. It's like when your family goes to the grocery store and buys milk for you to drink. That's what the mosquito moms are doing, is getting protein for their babies.
And is that maybe a reason that you would study mosquitoes, Lyric, too? Is like how mosquitoes do that, and what happens when maybe mosquitoes are have the ability to make us sick.
Yeah, so this is the problem, right? Is that sometimes a mosquito mom goes to take blood and she feeds on somebody that is maybe sick. And if that person has disease in their blood and it gets into the mosquito, sometimes the mosquito can pass that disease on to another person or animal. And that's why I do the work that I do, because I'm hoping to find ways to protect people from those diseases that mosquitoes carry and pass on.
And we have a question in the Q&A from Grisella, and Grisella is asking, how do you feed the mosquitoes in your lab? If the mosquitoes eat blood, how do you feed them in the lab?
So we have actually a setup in our lab where we can feed mosquitoes through a little sort of almost like cling wrap. So we get blood and we put it into a warmer, like a little incubator, and we put cling wrap on it, and the blood is warmed up by this little incubator, and it's held in place by the cling wrap, and mosquitoes come and poke through the cling wrap, the plastic wrap, and suck the blood that way. So we can do it in the lab. The other way is that sometimes I have to stick my arm into a cage, but I try not to do that very often. So maybe we should go back to the field.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could go back to the field and maybe look at all the different ways. So we got a sense of things are connected to each other, maybe by what they eat. And Nikki, maybe you could give us a sense of how people are also connected to the land, and like what can we do to study? So we're scooping up insects, and Lyric, you're trapping insects. So like, how can we look at and study nature around us if we're at home?
How can we look at and study nature around us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're interested in learning more about being an environmental educator, or if you're interested more about learning about limnology, which is like the study of ponds, one thing that you can do is use some simple tools. So you can go out there and see what's going on. I know all across Wisconsin that there's ponds and rivers, and even around here in Madison, we have lots of lakes and lots of marshes. And sometimes I will go down to the marsh that's by my house just to see what's going on with a net and some containers, and I put it in there. You know, I do a little scoop into the mud and I find out what's living in there. I have a few field guides that I use to identify things. I didn't always know what all of these things were, but as I've gotten more used to it and more experience, I've learned more and more about all these different insects. And something that I found out while working here at the Nature Center is that our pond is kind of healthy, which is something that we're really proud of. And we know that it's healthy because it has this big variety and diversity of insects that live here. So take the dragonfly nymph. They can't live in a place where there's a lot of pollution. So you can, just by seeing who's living in your pond or your marsh or your lake, you can tell the health of it. Because some things like leeches can live just about everywhere. But then there's other insects that cannot, and they're not tolerant to pollution. So we find out year after year, as we do these studies with kids that come here, that we have a pretty healthy pond. So we're pretty happy about that. Are there some other questions that I can answer?
There are some questions coming in, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat to ask those questions. And we've got one that can be for Nikki and Lyric, and it's about what kind of inspires you when you go and have this careful observation of nature. So like what do you, what can you share with observers about how inspiring it is to be studying nature?
Wow, that's a really cool question. I am inspired always when I see things happening in front of me, such as in just like a 15-20 minute time, we'll take the insects out here and then I'll start to see some of them eat one another. I can see the predator-prey relationship right in front of me. They don't know that I'm here. They don't care. They're living and doing their thing and trying to survive. And I think that that is so cool, that I can witness that in front of me day after day. Also, just finding different things. Even though I've been here for 12 years, I don't always find the same things. I was so excited yesterday when we found the water scorpions because I only find those about 3 times a year. And I found 2 yesterday. And I was so excited about that. So it's always different depending on the time of year that I come down here, what I'm gonna find, who's living in there, and the relationships that these animals are having with one another.
That's wonderful. And Lyric, what is inspiring to you about what you do?
About what I do. So I, just like Nikki, I'm a naturalist too. And I go outside and find so much fascination out of little things. And maybe you guys have seen, I think Apple is putting out a new movie or series called Tiny Things. So there's something really magical to me about how these little tiny organisms do so many different things and interact with the world, and I'm just fascinated. I go out and I see like those dragonfly nymphs that she showed us running around, and I want to know, what do they eat and how is it that they run so fast? They also have crazy fast jaws so they can grab other things out of the water and eat them. Those things just boggle my mind. So that inspires me. The other thing, though, I would say is that I study mosquitoes in particular because mosquitoes are fascinating and really important parts of our ecosystems, but they're also insects that can transmit diseases. And so one of the things that really inspires my work is that I hope that I can come up with new ways to protect people from diseases that mosquitoes carry.
And Zaina has a great question, I think, related to that. So we'll start with Lyric. Who inspires you? Or has there been somebody in your life that inspired you to get into science and do what you do today?
Well, I'll start. I would say that there are all kinds of inspiring people who put me down this path, but probably the first person who really inspired me to study insects was a teacher in college. So I went to Colorado State University. I knew I loved studying animals, and I took a class in what's called entomology, so the study of insects. And this teacher he just was so funny and so brilliant, and I was just hooked. So he was probably my real inspiration for going down this path. And now that I'm in that same role, so I do the same thing that he does, I actually find that it's my students that inspire me. They ask great questions and think in ways about things that I never could imagine, and I find that really inspiring.
That's wonderful. And Nikki and Kara, do you have an answer to that question about who inspires you?
Sure.
And yeah.
Well, the first thing that I thought of was my dad, because as a kid, I was always outside with my dad a lot. And he was a hunter, even though I wasn't. I spent a lot of time outside with him. But today, honestly, as an adult, it's the students that I teach. Just yesterday, I had a 3-year-old talk to me about this oak leaf that he found. And he came up to me and he brought it right up to me and he showed me this spot on the oak leaf. And I said, well, do you think that that's fungus or a gall? And he said, I think it's a gall. And so, and a gall has an insect inside of it. So I said, well, let's see if it is a gall. And we opened it up and there was this bright orange little larva in it. And he's 3 years old. And this kid loves talking to me about fungus and galls. And I find that amazing. So whenever students come here, they always inspire me to want to learn more because they're so excited about it too.
That's wonderful. And maybe a last question for us is, do you both have any advice to give the audience today about what they can do to get more involved in studying nature? And if there's ways that we can help, I know this is important to the Aldo Leopold Nature Center, to help protect nature as well and see the interconnectedness of us with our environment.
Definitely. Well, I think a lot of times one person thinks that they can't do that much because they're just one person. They're one kid or they're one adult. But every tiny thing that you do makes a big difference to the world. So some things that I know that I do to help, just little things, are that I try not to use plastic if I don't have to. You could, and if you can think of ones too, you can use cloth grocery bags when you go to the grocery store. That's a huge one. You could ride your bike somewhere instead of taking your car, and think about all the gas that you save and all the fossil fuels that you're going to save doing that. There's so many things that you can do. And also, if you just want to get more involved, you can look up about the Aldo Leopold Nature Center online to read about like the work that we do here. But little things even more than that. You can write about the outdoors that you see around you. You can take photographs of things that you see. You can keep documents. Something that Aldo Leopold did every day of his life was write down the temperature. He would write down what he saw outside. And by keeping these documents, he saw how the land changed around him. And just doing that in your own backyard is a way that can connect you to nature. And you can look back the next year and say, oh, you know, on October 16th, it was only 48 degrees like it is today. But maybe next year it's going to be 64 degrees. And there's a reason for that. So you can learn so much about the environment by just looking at the environment, you know, in your own backyard or on your city block.
That's wonderful. Lyric, yeah, do you have any comments about how people can do science and stay curious and be lifelong nature explorers?
Totally. So one of the things I really like to think about is like, what might be things that make it so people think they're not scientists? Like maybe they feel like, well, I can't do science because I'm not in a lab. But in fact, you're doing science every time you go outside and think creatively, ask questions and get curious. And you can use all kinds of things to be a mosquito scientist or a limnologist. You know, what I would say is, like, if you have something that inspires you and you think is interesting, find some kind of tools to dig deeper and look closer at it. If you're really interested in an ant pile in your backyard, you don't need fancy science tools from a lab to look deeper and understand more. Just get a spoon, right? Like look closely, look deeply, and ask lots of questions.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Let's get out there, let's ask questions and explore. And I want to thank everyone so much for joining us at the Wisconsin Science Festival. Thank you to our presenters, Lyric Bartholomew at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Nikki from the Aldo Leopold Nature Center. A recording of this field trip may be available, and we'll follow up with teachers about that. Remember that the Wisconsin Science Festival and the Bioblitz continues with events hosted from organizations all across the state that you can participate in. Just check out wisconsinsciencefest.org for more fun science. Thank you so much, Lyric and Nikki.